A team away day, but no escape for the PM from questions close to home about his party chairman. At a Misty Chequers, there was mounting pressure for clarity from Nadeem Zahawi about exactly why he paid a penalty to HMRC, the PM appearing decidedly tense.
When I appointed Nadeem Zahawi to his current job, no issues were raised with me about that appointment. But because Nadeem Zahawi himself put a statement into the public domain and there was other reporting, there are questions to answer.
A likely reason for the testiness? Well, earlier the boss of HMRC stated there are no penalties for innocent errors when he was quizzed by MPs about the controversy. And tonight there are yet more questions for the beleaguered party chairman. Also on News at 10 tonight. A transgender rapist will not be imprisoned in a women's jail. Under pressure, Nicola Sturgeon reacts to a public outcry. Russia pounds Kyiv with missiles after the announcement over tanks to Ukraine. Tonight, Rohit learns of a Putin plan for new production of deadly military drones. One last shot at England glory. Gareth Southgate tells Steve how his family got him to stay in the job.
They left Doha saying, you've got to give this one more go.
Reaching for the skies, back on track in the Cairngorms. The highest railway in the UK reopens for business.
This is ITV News at 10 with Julie Etchingham.
Good evening. In the political chess game over Nadeem Zahawi's job, the Conservative Party chair made a significant move today in the hope of hanging on to it. He's agreed that the tax office can hand over his records to the ethics investigator appointed by the Prime Minister to find out whether Mr Zahawi has broken the ministerial code. If he did, that is, in theory, a resignation matter. Mr Zahawi won't perhaps have liked what MPs heard today from the head of the said tax office. He said no one who had paid a penalty to HMRC, as Mr Zahawi has done, did so because of innocent errors. The Prime Minister made a decisive defensive move of his own today by saying no one raised issues with him about Mr Zahawi's tax affairs when he appointed him chair of the party.
After a day tucked away in the Buckinghamshire countryside, Rishi Sunak's cabinet left, some clinging on to their jobs. Among those in the meeting, the Tory party chairman Nadeem Zahawi, who was at the centre of tax avoidance allegations.
Again, I'm not commenting on any particular person's affairs.
But before that meeting got underway in Westminster, the head of HMRC raised more questions about the circumstances of Zahawi's penalty over previously unpaid tax.
There are no penalties for innocent errors in your tax affairs. So if you take reasonable care but nevertheless make a mistake, whilst you will be liable for the tax and for interest if it's paid late, you would not be liable for a penalty. But if your error was as a result of carelessness, then legislation says that a penalty could apply in those circumstances.
Back at Chequers, the Prime Minister was hosting his big day out, an away day for his cabinet at his country retreat. A moment to capture on camera, although there is no sign of the ministers under pressure in these pictures released by Downing Street this evening.
Today was meant to be about the government focusing on its priorities for the year ahead, like cutting inflation and NHS waiting times. But there were plenty of distractions.
One of those distractions being the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab. We understand at least 24 civil servants have now made bullying complaints about him. An inquiry into his conduct is already underway. He maintains that he has acted professionally. And Rishi Sunak has once again had to answer questions about Zahawi, who maintains that his error was not deliberate.
New information came to light over the past week, and that's why I decided to ask the independent advisor to fully investigate this matter, establish the facts and provide advice to me about Nadeem Zahawi's compliance with the ministerial code. But when I appointed Nadeem Zahawi to his current job, no issues were raised with me about that appointment.
But Labour say he should have done more and sooner.
I think Rishi Sunak just looks really weak. All of this is really just not the right way to run a government when Rishi Sunak promised integrity, professionalism and accountability. It just hasn't happened.
The Prime Minister told his cabinet today that he wants to restore optimism and pride in Britain. But the question is how he restores trust in his government. Amy Lewis, News at 10.
Anna Nushka joins us now from Downing Street to really contemplate these two great pressures on the Prime Minister, two cabinet ministers in precarious positions. Let's start with Nadeem Zahawi and even more questions for him tonight, Anushka.
Yeah, this whole affair has really shone a light on Nadeem Zahawi and all his affairs, not just what happened with the HMRC. And, you know, journalists here at ITV News have been going through the public accounts that we have and have come up with similar question marks to those in The Guardian tonight around the idea that there were unsecured loans of around £30 million given to his wife's UK property company. Now, the reason there's a question mark over that is it's quite unusual for loans of that level to be unsecure. But the fact that he has released that tax information from the HMRC suggests that he does want to fight this, and that's what allies say. They think he has an argument to make, and they are getting very upset by some of the coverage, particularly, for example, one article that said the noose was tightening. They said that had connotations of lynching and was inappropriate for an ethnic minority cabinet minister. So for now, he is fighting this, but it's getting very difficult.
Let's move then to Dominic Raab, the Prime Minister's deputy. We have to underline, and those bullying claims, any sign that the investigation there is drawing to a close at all?
You know, there were some wild rumours in Westminster today that it would actually draw to a close quite quickly, but the people who are close to it suggest to me that it has some time to run, and that's partly because the QC who is overseeing this is meeting individually with the claimants. We learnt yesterday that there are 24 people complaining about this. Those conversations are quite long. People suggest to me that it has some time to run. Dominic Raab holding to this idea that he's always acted professionally and that he also is going to fight this. But if it were to end with him having to go, that would really raise the pressure on Rishi Sunak, because Dominic Raab really is his closest ally. He was his right-hand man during the leadership campaign. He's his deputy Prime Minister now. The Prime Minister is desperate to focus on his 5 priorities like halving inflation and cutting waiting lists, but this is a huge distraction for his government.
Indeed. OK, Anushka, thank you very much indeed for that. A transgender woman convicted of 2 rapes before transitioning is tonight in a men's jail. Isla Bryson was being held on remand in Scotland's only women's jail, inflaming tensions in an already highly contentious issue. But at midday, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon announced on the advice of the Scottish Prison Service that Bryson would be moved to a male prison. She acknowledged what she called the understandable public and parliamentary concern. Bryson only decided to change gender after being charged.
A violent man who refused to take no for an answer. Adam Graham was charged with rape after attacking 2 women he met on online dating sites. But this is who the courts have convicted, because Adam Graham is now Isla Bryson, tried under that identity after deciding to transition. First taken to Scotland's only all-female prison before sentencing next month.
I have no idea why the Scottish Prison Service would want to assess a male rapist in a female prison.
Rona Hotchkiss used to be the governor at Cornton.
There is an atmosphere around this whole issue that says that trans rights trump women's rights, and in this situation that's simply appalling.
Bryson, who's had hormone treatment but not surgery, was kept apart from the other inmates here. But there's deep division over gender identity in Scotland, with the First Minister forced to defend her decision not to intervene sooner.
And what I have said is that short-term or long-term, this prisoner is not going to be in Cornton Vale, but it is important to allow the Scottish Prison Service operationally to give effect to the decisions that they have taken.
Can I ask the First Minister, will she go to Cornton Vale? Will she personally explain to the women there who are sharing their prison with a double rapist why on earth her government is allowing them to be in a cell next door?
You're a man and I'm a woman. That's your opinion.
All this playing out against a deeply controversial debate. Scotland's Parliament's just passed the Gender Recognition Reform Bill, making it easier to officially recognise someone's chosen gender. Legislation blocked by the UK government.
It's been made into an issue by people who don't want the Gender Recognition Certificate, the Gender Recognition Reform Act, to pass.
For trans activists like Heather, a delicate debate needing the coolest of heads is being jeopardised by the hot fury surrounding where Bryson's imprisoned.
Each prisoner is individually assessed. So if a prisoner is a danger to the prison population, or the prison population would be a danger to them, they are put into the correct prison estate.
Bryson, today moved to the male wing of a mixed prison, has been warned to expect a long sentence. The path to finding a balance between trans rights and safe spaces for women is likely to be equally lengthy. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
And Peter's in Glasgow tonight, so a lot of pressure on the First Minister today. Peter, she said today's decision was not affected by the gender recognition bill, but for many it is tied up with this really contentious issue.
It's one of those rare occasions where both sides are partly right. It's mainly embarrassing for Nicola Sturgeon, Scotland's First Minister, because with her legislation aiming to make it easier and faster for people to legally change gender and get one of these gender recognition certificates, she was challenged by the UK government, who said that one of the foundation stones of their objection was that it could be open to exploitation from predatory biological males who wanted to exploit the legislation to access women's only spaces. Nicola Sturgeon denied that was a risk, and then days later she's answering questions on this very issue. But it is important to stress that when Nicola Sturgeon says this has nothing to do with the legislation, she is actually right, because the individual, this double rapist we're talking about, we don't believe they were in possession of one of these gender recognition certificates, nor would they need to be to get into a women's prison. That's because the Scottish Prison Service allows individuals to self-identify. They're then kept away from the general population, as this individual was in a women's prison, while they're assessed. In this case, they were deemed to be a risk. They're sent back to an all-male prison. You could argue the system has worked exactly as it is supposed to, and the women were not at risk. They never rubbed shoulders with this individual. But then there are people who would say, well, yes, but if you do make it easier and faster for people to legally change recognition, then if someone has one of these gender recognition certificates, there's more weight to their argument that they should be in a women's prison. The prisons themselves could be concerned that they'd be open to legal challenges, not just prisons, but leisure centres with changing rooms, schools. Fundamentally, this is untested, and much of the debate is driven by fear. We're seeing the Scottish Government's learning that in many cases the rights of some women overlap with the rights of some trans people, many cases coming into friction. And the Scottish Government has to find a way to keep it respectful, but that's difficult while Scotland's two governments are in dialect conflict over this very issue.
Peter, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, the volley of Russian anti-Western propaganda that followed yesterday's promises of more tanks for Ukraine has been followed in turn by a barrage of missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities. One proved deadly for the first time this year in Kyiv. Across Ukraine, at least 11 people were killed.
Russia's response to the West's decision to supply tanks to Ukraine was swift and familiar. A series of missile and drone attacks. Such grief. My life is broken, says this woman. Overnight, explosions and sirens sounding across much of the country. In all, 11 people were killed. In Kharkiv to the east, there are monuments to the last tanks to liberate the city, Russian from German back then. Ludmila says Ukraine's allies must do even more to end this war.
You maybe need aeroplanes?
The sky should be closed. Close the skies. And more tanks should be given to us.
Are you happy that the West are sending tanks to Ukraine?
Yes, of course.
Dmitro is a wounded soldier. He tells me, without your help, we wouldn't hold on. As war heroes go, the German defence minister cuts an unlikely figure. Today, he denied there'd been any delay or dither. The tanks, he said, would be delivered on time.
I don't have any hints that it could be too late, because I think we will deliver our Leopards, the latest may be at the end of March.
Ukraine claims to have shot down most of the Russian missiles fired today. Evidence of the big difference Western-supplied air defences have made to this country on the home front. In the same way, the modern battle tanks now promised could give Ukraine a decisive edge on the front line.
Ukraine's president said, "We have to form a fist of tanks, a fist of freedom that will not allow tyranny to rise again." And yet, where the battle is most intense right now, it will feel like a long wait for Western reinforcement. John Ray, News at 10, Eastern Ukraine.
Well, the Russian drones that have done so much damage again today are a key part of President Putin's arsenal. They are currently made in Iran. But now officials have told ITV News that Russia is planning to build its own, buying in help from Iranian specialists in its own factory inside Russia in time for a spring offensive. And Rohit, our security editor, has obtained this information. What have you been told, Rohit?
Well, these are unmanned drones, so-called kamikaze drones, have caused so much destruction to the critical infrastructure around Ukraine. They've caused so much fear as well. In fact, I've been on the streets myself. When you hear that distant buzzing sound, you see the low-flying drones above you, and everyone runs and panics. And thousands of these have been brought in from Iran into Russia to be used here. What I'm being told by officials is that the Iranians have received around 350 million euros for these two shipments. But what happens next? Well, the understanding of some sources is that the Russians now plan to build a factory of their own. They're essentially taking this in-house. The site has been identified in a town called Yelabuga in central Russia. This is an industrial city with a big motor trade. There was a big car plant there, Ford car factory there at one point. The construction work hasn't begun yet, but it could begin, we're told, within weeks. This would be a big escalation. You know, the interest for the Iranians is perhaps deniability. These would be drones flying under the Russian flag, and so they might feel that they can avoid forthcoming sanctions. However, the most important thing here is what it tells us about Russia's plans as the spring offensive comes towards us. So Western tanks going towards the Ukrainians, and now Iranian drones built inside Russia for the occupying forces as well.
Terrifying prospect. Rohit, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, many of those who've been to A&E in Northern Ireland probably won't need telling. The waiting times are terrible, worse than in the rest of the UK. One A&E consultant told us today the delays were costing lives. The figures for December show that only 46% of patients were seen within 4 hours at A&E units. The most up-to-date figures for the rest of the UK are all over 60%. And almost 10,000 Northern Irish patients waited more than 12 hours to be seen. The target is 0.
Like the rest of the UK, Northern Ireland's health service is suffering. Unlike the rest of the UK, though, its problems are on another scale. Decade-long waiting lists and days spent on trolleys in hospital. It's now a system not working.
I just went in and said, "Mummy, hey, you know, it's okay, we're all here, you can go to sleep now."
She did pass away peacefully on a hospital ward with John and his sisters by her side. But the week before her death was not peaceful. Geraldine spent 7 days in A&E in crowded, cramped conditions, waiting for a bed.
That night we saw 12 beds in the corridor who were obviously waiting to get seen to. We were shocked that we were able to see those folks. There was very little dignity. My mum also was in that ward, and we saw things in that ambulance bay that probably visitors shouldn't have seen.
John's experience is not unique. Thousands of people are waiting for days in A&E every single month. We weren't given access to film inside this hospital, but one consultant came out to tell me how bad it is.
You think patients are dying because they're waiting so long?
I think lives are being lost, yes.
I think a lot of people will be shocked to hear you say that.
Yes, well, we do everything we can for people that come through the door, but unfortunately the situation is very serious, and in fact it's quite a crisis, because we're seeing hundreds and hundreds of people literally queuing to get into hospital.
It's not just in A&Es that patients are suffering. In fact, it's probably fair to say that in every department in this hospital they're having to wait. Even in the community. Some are on waiting lists for up to 11 years. And with so many people suffering recurring problems, it puts massive pressure on GPs too.
Can you give me an indication as to what's wrong, please?
At 8:30 every morning, the phones start ringing at this Belfast surgery. By 9 o'clock, Angela's filled every spare appointment. But she and Dr. Stout know there are hundreds of others in need of regular care.
We can look after them as best as we can. We can manage their symptoms. It is a relief, and it's terrifying to say this. It's now a relief to us, to every single GP, if a patient comes to us and says that they've got private insurance, because we know then that they will be seen. Whereas if they don't have private insurance, we just can't give that guarantee.
Healthcare workers were back on the picket line here today, fighting, they say, for patients to get that guaranteed care. Emily Morgan, News at 10 in Belfast.
Back in 1956, there were no motorways in the UK and only 3.5 million cars on the roads. Yet British factories were building 750,000 new ones a year. New figures out today show British car production has fallen back to that 1956 level, even though there are now 10 times more cars out there than there were then. Harry's here to take us through why the number has fallen.
Thanks, Julie. Well, the number of cars built in the UK is heading in the wrong direction. 7 years ago, the UK built more than 1.7 million cars. That number had fallen to 1.3 million before the pandemic began in 2021. As we began to recover from COVID, the industry continued to suffer as the number of cars dropped below 1 million. Now, the latest figures show a further 10% drop in the last year to just 775,000 cars. Now, how does that compare to other countries? Well, here's the trend in the UK for the past decade. Europe's leading car manufacturer, Germany, also followed a similar pattern over the same period. But the drop in recent years is not quite as sharp as here, down 36% in 10 years in Germany compared to 47% here in the UK. Well, what's going on? Well, the global car industry has suffered because of supply chain issues in China following strict lockdowns, a shortage of semiconductors and the war in Ukraine. But the UK car industry has suffered more, partly, some say, because of Brexit uncertainty and bureaucracy putting off potential investors. Now, UK production has also been impacted by recent factory closures. Honda's Swindon facility, which produced around 100,000 models a year, closed in 2021, while Vauxhall's plant in Ellesmere Port has paused production so it can transition to making electric vehicles. And it's building those electric vehicles, which, as we all know, is the future. Now, last year, the UK made more electric cars than ever before, almost 250,000. That represented almost a third of all car production. That is good, but not good enough. Critics say the UK government isn't offering enough financial support to help the industry transition. Last week, the car battery startup Britishvolt collapsed after running out of money. And while the government says it is investing in electric supply chains, some say it's falling far behind the ambitions of both the European Union and the United States.
Okay, Harry, thank you very much indeed for that. Now, after the disappointment of the quarter-final defeat in December's Men's World Cup in Qatar, remember that, the England manager Gareth Southgate appeared ready to call it a day. But something changed his mind. He's been telling us it was his family. They said he should give it one more go at the Euros next year to try to secure that elusive first trophy since, yes, 1966.
Gareth, hello, I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Until now, Gareth Southgate hasn't spoken about his reasons for staying on as England manager. We didn't know, for example, that his family played a small part in convincing him not to quit.
They left Doha saying, you know, you've got to give this one more go and try to get this trophy.
That came soon after England were dumped out of the World Cup by France, in a game many thought they should have won. In fact, if Southgate had followed his initial instinct from months earlier, that could have been his final match in charge.
And can you believe this scoreline?
Because last summer, after abuse from fans when England were humiliated by Hungary, Southgate contemplated announcing that he'd leave the job after Qatar.
How close were you to quitting?
There was negativity about me being in charge, and And the last thing I wanted was for that to be the overarching feeling going into a World Cup. If the debate was only going to be about finding flaws in what we were doing in order that I go at the end, then that would have been very difficult for the team to perform at their best.
While Southgate's decision to stay put has been widely welcomed, he admits his lack of silverware is fuel for those who believe he's taken this squad as far as he can.
You've had 3 tournaments and you haven't managed to do that. What would you say to those who think, you know, a change of voice, a change of face might be a good thing?
There will always be the thought that somebody else could do things differently, and I'm not going to affect people's thinking on that until we actually go and win something. So I've got to close myself off from that noise and accept it's going to happen. I think now the performance against France has shown the players, if they didn't believe it before, which I still wonder whether they truly believed before the game. Coming off the field, they know that's a game they could win and should have won.
Southgate is blessed with a host of young players who showed their world-class potential in Qatar. So by his own admission, anything less than lifting the Euros trophy next year will leave a hollow feeling.
I'm in a job with the chance to make some history. I think we've made progress with the team across the years we've been in charge. I think now we're in a different landscape to any previous England team, I guess, because of the success we've had. In our own minds, winning is probably the only thing that's going to fulfil us.
Looking ahead to the Euros, Gareth Southgate there talking to Steve. Now, about 66 million years ago, a space rock 6 miles wide slammed into the Earth and wiped out the dinosaurs. Another much, much smaller asteroid is heading very, very close to us tonight. But NASA say, thankfully, it won't hit, and even if it enters the Earth's atmosphere, it'll burn up. This is the trajectory of the 2023 BU. It's the size of a lorry, between 11 feet and 28 feet long, and will come closest in the next couple of hours. But scientists confidently predict it'll zoom right past us, 2,200 miles above South America. And when it does, it'll be 10 times closer than the orbit of communication satellites and more than 100 times closer than the moon. Pretty near miss, it looks like. And finally, slightly closer to the ground, thankfully, Britain's highest railway reopened for business today to the delight of skiers and sightseers. The Cairngorms Funicular Railway has had its ups and downs. It's been closed for 4 years for repairs and refurbishment. That was much longer than timetabled. But now, once again, it only takes 5 minutes to reach the top of the world, or something that feels very like it.
The train now arriving maybe 4 years late, but it's still got a warm welcome on a cold day. The Cairngorm Mountain Funicular was forced to close because of structural problems, depriving most skiers access to the summit. A 5-minute ride became an hour-long trek.
So this is a great day. We've been waiting a long time for the train to get back up and running. There's been a lot of hard work, effort and ingenuity put into fixing the train.
For the local community to get the kids now up to the top of the mountain via the train, you know, that's the best news story for me, just to see all the local school children skiing on Cairngorm.
We've invested in a season pass. We've been waiting avidly for this today.
There wasn't much of a view from the top today, but when it first opened 20 years ago, the railway was meant to take Highland skiing to a whole new level. Cairngorm's first chairlifts opened in 1961, turning Aviemore into Britain's top ski resort.
And you can have an all-inclusive holiday for just over £20 a week.
The cost of fixing the broken rail track snowballed to £25 million, but backers say it's money well spent.
Billions are spent on transportation across the UK every year. We got a fraction of that, to the benefit of Scotland and the Highlands. And it's all about economic development, regeneration, economic growth, employment opportunities, directly and indirectly. That's what will make Cairngorm great again.
Those who don't ski or snowboard can dine in Britain's highest restaurant.
It was really a nice experience to come up in such a short time. It was up within 5 minutes, straight to the top. It was nice.
When the snow vanishes in spring, hikers will take over the slopes, safe in the knowledge that once again, the fastest way down is a slow train. Ian Woods, News at 10.
And that's it for tonight. Good night.
Thank you.